Hey everybody, today we're going to further explore the squash and stretch function or technique using animation in Maya. So I'm going to start by doing a bit of a different method on the squash and stretch method. Previously, we could see the squash and stretch method as simply animating the ball kind of with poses to poses and dealing with our squash and stretch this way. What we're going to do is we're going to set up our squash and stretch using grouping and using our outliner. Our outliner is, of course, right here on our screen. Also, it is under Window, Outliner, if you cannot find it there. I'm going to do a few things, though, to prep this. We're going to start by putting the preferences on, and we're going to make sure that our animation preferences are set to Auto Key, Key Modified Attributes, Weighted Tangents is checked, and both the default in and out tangents are always set to linear. I'm going to go ahead and save those, and also obviously make sure we're set to 24 frames a second. I'm going to right click and set my playback speed on the timeline to real time, and we're good to get started. Now before I lay any keyframe down, I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to delete the history of my ball, and we're going to name this ball. And we're going to do a few things in the outliner. I want you to create 3 groups. So I want you to hit Command G or edit group 3 times. So Command G, Command G, Command G. Now that, if we open these little plus symbols up, will give us 3 groups and a ball. The first group we're going to entitle Translate. The second group we're going to entitle Scale. The third group we're going to entitle Rotate. So we have translate, scale, rotate, ball. Now we're going to set our pivot points respectively for each one. Translate, I'm going to keep in the middle. Scale, I'm going to hit D on my keyboard, and I'm going to move that directly down to the bottom. You can see here, it's the bottom point of my sphere or my ball, and hit D again. And on rotate, I'm going to do a very similar function. I'm going to move it to the bottom of that group, hit D, and now you can even actually see that we can turn it side to side, and we have a lot of extra options for this. All right, so look at the pivot points once more, see where I moved them, and again I hit Command G 3 times. And the ball, that's after I highlighted the ball, of course. All right, now we're ready to go, and we're going to treat this in a unique way. For our translates, I'm going to actually hide everything but X, Y, and Z for translate. So I'm going to grab from rotate and drag down to visibility, right click, and I'm going to say hide selected. That's just going to give us those attributes. For scale, I'm going to highlight everything but the scale, and I'm going to hide those in my channel box. And for rotate, I'm obviously going to grab everything except the rotates, and I'm going to hide everything but those rotates. This is going to give us a very, very clean workspace to deal with. Now we're going to kind of go with the same technique. So as you guys know, if we simply go to Google Chrome and we type squash and stretch ball timing, make sure we put stretch in there. Give it a few seconds. We can go ahead and find kind of a starting point or a template for us to work off of. Now, what you're going to notice is there's really quite a few timing and spacings that we can work off of. It really depends on the object, the height of the bounce, and so forth. So realistically, you would want to try to figure this out on your own. What we're going to do is we're going to deal with just probably this one. This is a similar one we did in class. So we're going to deal with this timing and spacing sheet. So we're going to go and use our translate to set these initial keyframes. So we're going to start by the ball being in the air at the highest point. So I'm going to do this, and we'll keep it maybe not that high, that's a little too intense. And I'm going to set Shift W. I'm going to set keyframes for simply the translate. Let's go back here. Make sure we get it to match up here. I'm grabbing scale by accident, so there we go. So let's move that up. Let's do Shift W, and we're going to go up a few frames. And if we follow this chart or this guide, 7 is on the floor. So when we go up to frame 7, which is about right there, we're going to hit 0, and that's going to set a keyframe because automatic keyframes are turned off, or on, pardon me. And you can see the pivot point does follow. We're going to go up, and the next one will be 12. So according to that chart. Now this chart may be right, may be wrong, but I'm going to move it up. So we can go down maybe a third of the way. And you know, at this point, I may want to simply switch to perhaps a side view or the front view. The front view is always a good one to look at. And this will give us a little more realistic eyeball of what we're doing. Let's go back to our chart here. 17 looks to be on the ground. So on frame 17, I will simply type 0. Now, that is a really helpful hint. The other really cool thing you can do here, and this is a trick that we didn't really go over in class, is on frame 25, if I want to set that keyframe, what I can actually do is middle mouse click any of these keyframes to copy them. So if I hold my middle mouse click down, for instance, on frame 7, if I click and drag with my left mouse button, you can see it plays the animation, but if I push my middle mouse button down, you can see it keeps it at the same data. So now I could hit Shift W and kind of go from there. So we have obviously that kind of hit there. So, and I don't know why I went to frame 25. Let's see, that's frame 17, that's the ground. Frame 25 is actually, yep, it's the ground too. And frame 21, we're going to pull in the air a little bit more. So we want to make sure, you can see I selected the ball, not the group. So I'm going to go back to my group, select the translate. Frame 21, and we'll move it up slightly. Perfect. And we're going to go to 25, which we already did. 28 is in the air. And it's just going to be ever so slight for 28. The trick is selecting the right items. And then I believe it was 31. Yes, it was. 31 is on the ground, so we can simply type 0 once more. All right, so what do we have now? Well, let's lower our keyframe count so you guys can see this. What we have is the following animation. Really nothing special. If you look at the graph editor, which is always a good choice to do, you'll notice that we have our translates. Right now we're only dealing in Y. We made it linear, so we don't have to worry about spacing as of yet. Translate Z we're not going to use, so I'm actually going to highlight those keyframes and hit delete on my keyboard. So now I only have really the 2 attributes keyframed. And now I'm going to play with the X translation. So I'm going to start with the X translation, and I'm going to set a few keyframes. So of course the first one, and we're going to go to X, and I'm going to move it over here. Again, got to be very careful that we stay on there. There we go. Move it over here, and that will set one. So now it will kind of begin its process of carrying over. Now we're going to have to play with that in the graph editor, because what you can see that happened was if I do translate X, I held that keyframe. I actually want it to be a straight line. Only 2 keyframes, beginning, end. And let's look at that now. This should do what we want it to do. Boom, 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 boom. Perfect. So we have our X. Now, that is translate. Now, in translate, when the ball hits, I want it to hold for a bit. So I'm going to middle mouse click next to that keyframe and drag it, let go, and then I'm going to keyframe both X and Y right there. Give this a second. There we go. That was kind of strange. But I'm going to keyframe that. Now, I can also just worry about the Y movement. So if I want, I can always say, okay, I'm going to just keyframe Y, and we'll get back to X. So I'm going to key selected. So we have this. We have sliding. We're going to get rid of that. It goes in the air. It hits the ground. We'll give it a few frames. Middle mouse click and drag. Key selected. Goes in the air. Hits the ground. 1, 2, maybe in this case, it's starting to die off at the end because the squash and stretch will be less and less. And so we use our middle mouse click and drag. and right click, key selected, and then it goes once more in the air and it hits the ground, and then obviously we just leave it there. Now, using my graph editor, I'm going to look at just these functions and I'm going to add the respective keyframes to the x-axis. So when I get on a specific keyframe, I'm going to go ahead and insert a keyframe. You can see I have actually buttons that will do that. We can insert keyframes in these specific areas. So you have some options to do this. We have the insert key tool, which we can use our middle mouse button and click in, or maybe our left mouse button. There we go. And we can set a keyframe there. We can, that's okay to do. You can see if I right click, actually it's working a little better. The other option is simply keyframe it with Shift W. I'm going to go here and I want to repeat this value. So I'm going to just hit Shift W again. But what I really want to do with these is I want to grab them and put them on the same level. So we'll get to that in a second. Let's go up and kind of set our keyframes first. Shift W, Shift W, Shift W, Shift W. Looking good. Let's do a quick save scene as, and we'll call it animation. Looks good. Cool. And these aren't done yet. We want to make them flat like this, because right now you see they're going upwards. So you're going to grab those keyframes, and let me focus so you guys can see this a little better. And I'm going to actually grab them and pull them down. The other quick way to do this is to use this flat button up here, pardon me, the diagonal button. Now, sometimes this works, sometimes this doesn't. Sometimes you need to kind of give it a kind of a head start. So I usually use the shift method. So if I hold down shift, it kind of attempts to snap. And what I really want to do is then kind of play with these, flatten them, make them more linear, whatever it takes really to get that same data. Because right now this is at 4.24 and that's at 4.24. That's good. This number right here is at 11.79. I can also copy that number, then paste that number to get it to the right thing. 17.65. I want to apply it to the keyframe next to it. Oops, got to paste it in the right place. Paste it in there. And now we have even numbers to kind of deal with X. So now we're going to get some spacing out of that as well. Boom, 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 boom. That gives us enough room for the squash. Now I've only keyframed translate. There's no keys if you look at the bottom here on any of them, including the ball. Their pivot points will stay the same, and this is a really good way to do this. So once we have this, now we can work a little bit on the squash and stretch. So I'll go down to scale. I'll highlight scale in blue, and we'll start by hitting command, or pardon me, Maya glitch right here. There we go. We're going to hit shift and R, and that's going to do our scale. And we're going to start everything at 1. And when the ball hits the ground, it's still going to be 1, so shift and R to do the scale. And by frame 9, let's depress that by 0.5. So it's going to kind of squish like a squished hot dog. So it hits the ground, it depresses, it goes in the air at the top of the peak, which in this case looks to be frame 12. We want it back up to 1. And we're using our 3 poses here like we did in class. Boom. We haven't done the stretch yet. Hits the ground. This is going to still be 1. So we're going to shift R and keyframe it, or right click and key selected, whichever one works best for you. Hits the ground. We'll wait. Right there looks good. Let's make this point, I don't know, 7.5. It's going to be a little less of a squash and stretch. Remember, this one was 0.5. And we'll make sure at the top of the peak it goes back to 1. And again, I'm only dealing in scale. It hits the ground, and this is going to be even less. So this will be like actually that's going to be 1 because it hit the ground there. And we'll probably keep it at 1 actually. I think that's going to be the best way to do it. We could go to like 0.9 just so it's a little bit, and then at that peak we'll go back to 1 just to show the change. Then obviously at the very end we know it's 1. Right click, key selected, or Shift R to keyframe all. Alright, now we have the beginnings of our squash and stretch. Now check this out. We haven't done the stretch yet, but look what we get. Looking good. Alright, I'm going to save that out. Good. And now I can deal with the stretch. So when the ball comes down between here and here, I want it to stretch. So what I'm going to do is stretch it. And I can stretch this in multiple ways. I have auto keyframe turned on. I can stretch it upwards. Now it's going to get to the peak. At that point, again, I want to make sure it's to 1 when it hits the top there. So I'm going to type 1 here and just make sure I keyframe all. It's very important that you're keyframing everything. So it goes back to normal. Then when it comes down, maybe we'll have a little stretch. Oh, got to get back on scale here. We'll have a little stretch. And then we'll do the Shift E again, or excuse me, Shift R. There we go. So it comes down, boom. And we can play with the arrangement of that in a second. It goes back up, and we will stretch it. Actually, I'm going to make this a little skinnier. Hits the ground. We'll make it 1 again. Do our Shift R to keyframe all. So we want to maintain the mass. Okay. Even though it looks like it's getting bigger and smaller, we want to still maintain that mass in there. It hits. That looks like it should be set to 1, so it looks like I kind of missed the keyframe here, so I'm going to make sure I set those to 1 and hit. All right, so we have the bounces in place, and you can see the stretch kind of retains its value. You want to make sure that it doesn't get too terribly wide at certain points, so I'm looking at all my values over here to the left as I go forward. So that's very important to see. On the initial one, maybe we want to stretch it slightly as well. So we'll stretch it, and we'll do a Shift R just to make sure we keyframe everything. So it comes down, boom, 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 and so forth. So again, it's very important it hits, it stretches down. We can even go and add a little bit of wideness to that. Again, right here we're having some, as it comes down, it's actually getting bigger, smaller, smaller, good. And we'll look at that in our curve in a second. So it's important that we, again, hit all the right points. Here I'm looking at it, this actually needs to be 1. And so we'll do Shift R again to get that. Now that was just with the scale. So we haven't played with spacing yet, we're just getting our timing of all these elements. So let's see what happens when it comes in. Yeah, it's getting there. All right, so let's look at our graph editor, do a check. And for scale, I'm going to go ahead and maybe delete by type static channels, just so I can see what I need. You can see I put some errand or bad keyframes for rotate. I don't need those. And we didn't really mess with the scale of Z. We just kind of messed with these. So you can see the charts. The charts don't usually lie. You can see the dissipation or the growth in scale, depending on where it's at. Again, right here. We haven't played with any tangents as of yet, and those are moving pretty well. So the final stage in this, the very, 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 very final stage, is the rotation pivot. So we're going to go to rotate, and I'm going to use this, and I'm going to hit E on my keyboard, and I'm going to end up rotating in 4. So let's do, we'll just do like 13 here. And we'll do Shift E, we'll grab all our rotations. It's going to hit. At this point when it hits, maybe we'll go back to 0. That was 7, so it comes in can see it rotates, boom. And when it comes up, which is roughly around 10, maybe we'll rotate it out a little bit more. And you got to be careful, you will get minor distortion here, so just kind of keep in mind that. Comes in, so it comes down, boom. When it hits the ceiling, it should be 0 again. And it's going to change directions, and kind of halfway through perhaps, we'll kind of give it a little sideways rotation. Boom. When it hits, you can see that's our delay again, so it kind of stops. Let's go to, let's make it 0 here. We get a little click here, if you can see that. We're not really getting our squash going as well as we'd like in there. So that's something we need to readdress in the squash. So if I go down to scale again, and I look when it hits, between here and here, this ball should actually be shrinking a little bit in there. There we go. Now we got it. So we kind of missed one when we went. So it comes down, boom, 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 and then so forth. So we may want to go further than this just for demo's sake. I'm going to leave it like this. Let's play through. Cool. So that's without timing. Now I'm going to go to my graph editor, and I'm going to start with translate and hit focus. You can see all our different graphs that we used, and I'm going to start translating with curves. So this is when I highlight everything, I break all the tangents that I need to, and I hit W on my keyboard, and I begin to do some of this. So I'm going to make these extremely sharp. I can also use my tangents up here. There we go. And it is a fun process once you get to this level, because now really the fun stuff starts. And you can see some of the things are a little off, but we'll go back and fix those in final revisions. And we're going to go through and adjust what I need. Undo that one. This one needs to be a bit tighter. Same goes with this one. In this case, I'm going to just make it subtle. And I'm going to move that up. I'm going to move that up. That's looking pretty good. Let's look at translate. For our translates, maybe we want to kind of scoop down the end game here. So for X, so let's grab all the X's. Let's break the tangents where we need to. And let's just get a little more of a slow ending to it. Let's see if that helps. Let's see what we got. Boom, 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 boom. Cool. Definitely gives it more life. It gives it a better squash and stretch. You can see it hits, changes direction. We have the up and down directional change, which is really important. Some of these are off. Like I would go back honestly and hit the scale here. I really think this is just a little too big. So I'd probably take, again, some of these maybe down a little bit, where I can. Just slightly. But we're getting definitely a better aspect. And we've done this with 3 different transformational nodes. Now, what do you ask the final node is for? Well, the final node is if you just want to spin the ball. So if, for instance, I just want to rotate this going from, let's say, Command E here, or pardon me, Shift E to rotate the keyframes. And I want it to rotate, I don't know, it ends about there. Let's say I want it to rotate 1, 2, 3, let's do -780 degrees. And we can always delete by type static channels just to clean this up. Now what we're going to have, and it's kind of hard to see because we don't have much, it rotates forward and still pivots as it's rotating. All of that being very important to the roll. So again, we put the spin of the ball is on the ball layer. The pivot of the ball, and we could even change this to PIVT, is on the rotate layer. The scale is your squash and stretch, and the translate is obviously your up and down and left and right. So that gives us a pretty nice ball animation that we can kind of play best out and see our full speed kind of picture with it. My graph editor decides to get out of the way, and boom, boom, boom. The last bounce still needs some work. I didn't really go into all the curves. You can see that curve is there's a sharp edge there, isn't there? You see how it goes straight? I would need to fix that out. But the first couple are actually falling really, really nice. Before I would turn this in, I would go into, obviously, like I mentioned, that translate, and also go into my graph editor. And yeah, there it is. That's a nasty looking curve. So what I tend to do in those situations is just pretty much grab everything, because you never know what you're going to do. Hit focus. That didn't help at all, did it? Let's grab the ball. Let's start with the translate. There we go. That's what we want to really focus on. Grab the rest of the stuff. And what I'm going to do is grab this. And we're going to just scoot it in a little. And I bet you that will kind of start to fix. Yeah, a little bit. It's more of where it hits. So again, for translate, I have it hitting here. I could just grab it because it's auto keyframed and say, no, hit here instead. Make sure you're grabbing the right one too. That's very important. You can see there I kind of goofed up a little bit. So here, from here to here, it's too far. I want it to be about there when I'm said and done. So boom. Boom. Something's going on here. I'm going to stay on, I was going to end the video, but I'm going to stay on and try to fix this. It probably is that easing I did on that keyframe. Let's settle that easing down and see if that changes. Comes in. Yeah, it's a little nicer now. So let's move that out just slightly. There we go. That's what we're looking for. Let's play this back. Boom, 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 boom. Very cool. So finally we got our final result. Sometimes, again, the ease looks really good when you first do it, but after making different changes on different pivot points, that's what happened. But now this is the TSR, or Translate Scale Rotate method. It's a very common method. It's good, like I said in class, to start with just the straight ahead kind of playful method, but this is a very good way to get all of your aspects using grouping and using these null objects in which each have their own pivot point. So hopefully you learned some stuff, and I look forward to the next video.